Chapter 13. Let's see if I can use my deep voice. And I saw a beast rise. No, that's too dramatic. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given to it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear to hear, let him hear. If anyone was to be taken to captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with a sword must he be slain. Here's a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. And I'll stop right there for it. You all like a good myth, don't you? We talked about the myth last week of Lucifer. Everybody grasped the whole Lucifer thing, that Lucifer is not Satan, but Lucifer was another name for the king of Babylon. Okay. It's the only place in Scripture that it's used. And it's, I think it's translated also day star for it. Myth after, and it's one of the hardest things to overcome as we talk in the book of Revelation is preconceived ideas and myths in this. We have some great myths in our society today, don't we? And boy, if I mention a couple of them, and I offend you, my apologies. But, when I was a little boy, 11 years old, I watched the moon landing. Millions of people all over the world watched the moon landing. But you know what I found out? It was a myth. September 11th, 2001, I watched as planes flew into the towers on 9/11. But you know what I found out? It was a myth.
Well, some of the myths happen to be true.
Yes, yeah, there's a naysayer and every, but we have so many myths floating, and I don't believe that they are myths, by the way. We have the Zapruder film of John Kennedy being shot and from the grassy knoll on Dealey Plaza, and it doesn't matter who sees it. We've got to come up with a conspiracy. And so, fighting the myth in chapter 13 that this is talking about the Antichrist. You've heard of the Antichrist. The Antichrist, right? Yes. This myth that was perpetuated by Hal Lindsey and the late, great planet Earth. Yes?
Isn't the Antichrist supposedly supposed to be the son of Satan?
Is the Antichrist the son of Satan? Oh,
That's how they portray it in Hollywood.
Yes. Oh, Hollywood. If it's in Hollywood and on the internet, we know that it's true. I have slow down and microphone. Now, there's some people that say, if you're going to talk, you need to use a microphone so everybody can hear. So, if you're not going to use a microphone, make sure if you make a comment from the audience, because some people do not have the sharp hearing of young children. Okay? So, please speak up for the advantage to everyone. The Antichrist. When Hal Lindsey wrote his book, The Late Great Planet Earth, in 1981. Do you know when the end of the world was going to be? In the next 7 years. Now, I didn't always get passing grades in math when I was in school. But if I added 7 to 81, what would I get? Judgment should have came in 1988. Okay? The Antichrist. Without even using the verses that talk about the Antichrist in the book of John, 1 John and 2 John, Hal Lindsey jumps to this conclusion about this Antichrist, this one world ruler, as he interprets chapter 13. And guess what? He was wrong. Oh, he made a lot, and he is still making money on this. I come back to Harold Camping. Everybody remember who Harold Camping was? The world's going to end in 2012. He got the date 3 times wrong. And if he did it a 4th time, he'd get it wrong again. They had billboards, and I have pictures of billboards that I collected from it, that he had predicted when the end of the world was, based on his calculations. And we're going to have one of those calculations. I don't think we'll get to it in the end of chapter 13, but it says, the end of chapter 13, and it says, this calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, versus the number of the man. His number is 666. Ooh. Sorry. Because we failed to read the Bible. What is the Antichrist? Is there the Antichrist? It is written in 1 John, little children. 1 John chapter 2. Please read it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I'm going to read it from the New King James. Little children, it is the last hour, as you have heard, that the Antichrist is coming. Even now, many Antichrists have come. When did John write his letter? In the 1st century. The 1st century. Come, by which we know that this is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out that they might be made manifest that none of them were of us. Drop down to verse 22 of 1 John 2. Who is a liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? Okay? He is Antichrist. Not the Antichrist, but he is Antichrist, who denies the Father and the Son. Whoever denies the Son does not have the Father either. He who acknowledges the Son has the Father also. Chapter 4, and this is in your notes that I handed out. You read this from there, but go to your own Bible, read it for yourself. By this we know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, and is now already in the world. Hal Lindsey never references these. 2 John chapter 1, verse 7. For many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not confess Jesus Christ is coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an Antichrist. So over and over we have the definition of an Antichrist. Now there probably was Antichrist in the 2nd century, the 3rd century, on up to today. There are people who say, you know what? Jesus never came in the flesh. You guys are sheeple for believing it. Sheeple are people. Okay? You're just following these myths and legends. Okay? That is the spirit of the Antichrist. It's not the guy who has 666 tattooed just under the skin line. It's a myth. Do I believe in Antichrist? Yes, because I can read it right here. Do I believe in the Antichrist who's going to be the one world ruler? No. And neither should you. So that's the myth we have to overcome, because as they talk about this, the second beast is what they say is the Antichrist. I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Where have we seen this beast before? It's a hint. It's already in here. Where have we seen this beast rising out? And what does it mean to rise out of the sea? When something comes down from heaven, where is it coming from? What does it represent? It represents something coming down from God, except for when they talked about Satan being cast out of heaven. We're talking spiritual, symbolic things. When something comes out of the sea, it's not from heaven, is it? Typically, something that comes out of sea is an empire or a nation. Something comes out of the earth, it would be a man. Something comes from the bottomless pit, what would you assume that is? Good or bad? Yeah, okay. Those are sweeping generalizations, but that helps us to understand. But when we left chapter 12, and as I say, this is an unfortunate chapter break here, because chapter 12 ends in the last verse, 17. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold of the testimony of Jesus. He stood on the sand of the sea. Okay? Who are the people who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus? The saints. We call them Christians. Okay? They would not be Jewish, technically speaking, because they rejected Jesus. Now, does that mean there weren't Jews who believed in Jesus? Yes, we know that. But he's talking about Christians. And he stood on the sand of the sea. Okay? Standing on the sand of the sea. If we didn't have the chapter break, we would go right into this description. This isn't a different vision. This is the same vision. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, and 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, with its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave its power and its throne and great authority. Where have we seen that description in verse 2? Daniel chapter 7. Daniel is looking forward in time. He's given this vision in Daniel chapter 7. And he describes this first beast was the lion. And the lion represented, he's describing the same kingdoms that he, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2, which he says, Daniel, you're the head of gold, but after you is going to come the next kingdom, which all historians say the next world empire was the Medo-Persians. The Persians were stronger. That's why the bears lifted up on one side. The next kingdom is the Macedonian or the Greece, which is, it was a leopard. A leopard is very fast. How fast did Alexander the Great take the world? And it may be a myth, it might be a legend, but when he sat down and said, there's nothing more to conquer, he had gone through swiftly and conquered. But then Daniel sees this fourth beast, and he said it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. In chapter 2 it says, in the midst of those kings, there's going to be a kingdom that's going to come up that shall never come to an end. And that kingdom is the church. Okay? He's seeing the same thing in Daniel chapter 7 with the same, look at the descriptions. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and his mouth was like a lion. What was the kingdom immediately before the Roman Empire? Greece. Greece was represented in Daniel chapter 7 by the leopard. And he says, its feet were like a bear's. What was the kingdom just before the Macedonian or the Greeks? It was the Medo-Persians, represented by the bear. Then, and then he says, and in his mouth, like his lion's mouth, and he says this beast, this terrifying beast. So who's the beast? Rome. It's the Roman Empire. It's the Roman Empire of the first century. As he's giving this, it is that beast. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. And who is the dragon? Satan. How do we know that? Because we just read it in chapter 2. The dragon, Satan, the devil, the serpent, all describing the same thing. So there's absolutely no doubt that this dragon in chapter 12 is the dragon that gives the authority and power. How did the dragon give his power and authority to this fourth beast? Well, we go back to verse 17 of chapter 12. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring And how is he going to make war on the rest of her offspring? He's going to engage this fourth beast. Now we begin to understand why Daniel is so terrified by this fourth beast in his vision in Daniel chapter 7. And when we get into Daniel's chapter 10, 11, and 12, he's going to see this again. It is absolutely frightening. Why? Because it's making war on the saints. Now, Daniel doesn't have a comprehension or understanding of this kingdom. He knows there's going to be a kingdom that's going to be established, but he doesn't have an understanding of it. All he sees is this beast that's coming, and it gets its great authority. One of its heads seems to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, for he had given the authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like this beast, and who can fight against it?" Now, who is this mortal wound that was healed? Well, you know your ancient Roman history, don't you? Which Caesar? A little bit further. Who was the mortal? If you know some of your Roman history. Nero. The legend goes that Nero, and it's called, and I always have a hard time, Nero Redivivus. Nero revived. The legend was that Nero, anybody remember how Nero died? Nero was declared an enemy of the state by the Senate. Nero, he played the violin, right? That's another legend. Yeah, they say that he played the fiddle while Rome burned. Okay. Rome burned, and who did Nero blame the burning of Rome on? The Christians. Now, someone say, myth. Anybody ever read the complete works of Tacitus? I haven't either. It's a long read. It's a long read. But Tacitus confirms this. Historians confirm this, that Nero blamed the Christians. Now, you probably have read that the reason that Nero might have burned Rome himself was he wanted a new Rome. He wanted a Rome in his own image. That's speculation. That's one of those things we look back and think, boy, why did that guy open that umbrella on the Dealey Plaza? Oh, no. Paul.
I mean, for the same token, couldn't you say that he burned it to get back at the Christians? That's a huge problem with Christianity.
And we get into those gray areas of talking of, did he have it burned? What it is. It's been proven that he was somewhere else when it burned. But whatever the reason was, he takes advantage and he finds a scapegoat. And what's a scapegoat? Someone you blame. A scapegoat, technically the definition, is somebody that you blame. If you can't find a good reason, you find a scapegoat for it. When you have a scapegoat, I blame something, that's the reason I do things. So he finds that scapegoat is the Christians. And so as a result, up to this point, almost all of the persecution of Christians has been by who? How do we know that? Because it's recorded in the book of Acts. There are like 21 different persecutions you read of in the book of Acts. And almost without exception, even when they killed James. When Herod Agrippa killed James, when he killed James, he says, hey, they like this. Go get Peter, put him in prison. I'm going to get him next. And then Peter escaped. So, by and large, the persecution of the Christians was done by the Jews. Now, Nero is going to blame them. Now, the beginning of this. Do we need to go back and talk about the Great Tribulation? Because some people believe, if you read Hal Lindsey's, that the Great Tribulation is still to come. But if you read Matthew chapter 24, he says, all these things will happen in this generation. And the word for generation that he uses in Matthew chapter 24 is genea. In some terms, it means age. And Paul talks about that age in Ephesians chapter 3 and 4. But here, he's talking about a generation, a period of 30 to 40 years. In this generation, all these things are going to happen, including the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation, when you read about the history of what the persecution was done upon the Christians, when Nero declared it, began his persecution of it, is absolutely barbaric, hanging them up and using them as flames and torches in the palaces. And some people, and there are deniers of this, but Tacitus records it, Suetonius records these. It's recorded throughout that period of history. But eventually Nero is declared an enemy of the people, or enemy of the state by the Senate. He flees, and he flees thinking he's going to make the Parthians flee to the Parthians. Eventually he ends up killing himself in 68. This is, you can read it for yourself. It's all in the history. It's there. The legend begins in Nero Redivivus that Nero is going to come back. That Nero is going to come back with the Parthians. That he may have died, but he's going to come back from his death, and he's going to come to Rome and destroy it for what they have done. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled, and they followed the beast. Now, part of this, I'm not saying that this is that mortal wound, but the mortal wound really surrounds the year of 4 emperors. And you've read about this, haven't you? The year of 4 emperors. Nero dies, and in the next year, 4 emperors come, and a civil war. And if anybody ever watched the Roman Empire series on PBS? PBS declares that it was the worst year of the Roman Empire, this civil war that comes about. And if we go back to the 4 horsemen, what was one of the things that one of the 4 horsemen was going to do? Remember the red horse? It's going to be war. This civil war that comes about is that mortal wound. They believe this is going to be the end of the Roman Empire. Emperor after emperor, Vespasian hears about this, hears about the death of the last one, Vitellius. He goes to Egypt to secure food for the troops, hears about it. He is declared emperor while he's in Egypt. But you and all this. Yes, Taylor.
I have a footnote that I could read from a new study Bible about Nero. Nero was the first emperor to declare an official state of persecution against Christians. Further, he burned hundreds of Christians alive to light his imperial garland at night, and butchered others in various ways. Nero's local persecution in Rome, however, merely paved the way for many persecutions that followed. Months of civil war followed Nero's death on June 9, AD 68, as new imperial claimants viewed for power. Nevertheless, at the end of the 1st century, people in the empire still commonly believed that Nero remained alive. Various impostors arose claiming to be Nero, one of them less than a decade before Revelations was written. That most recent false Nero terrified the empire, garnering the support of the feared Corinthians. Some Jewish visionaries claimed that Nero would return, perhaps from the dead, perhaps leading to the Parthians. Some early Christian writers expected the new Nero they called a great beast. The tradition that Nero would return to persecute Christians became so widespread that in the Armenian language, Nero actually became the equivalent for the Antichrist. Ancient commentators such as Tertullian, Jerome, Augustine, as well as most modern commentators, have seen Nero as a model for the expected evil Nero. See article, Mark of the Beast. None of this means that John expected Nero to return literally. Romans could speak of particular emperors as being like earlier emperors, such as figures. Tiberius was an Augustus. The evil imperial power came like Nero, just as the figures of Revelation 11, 3-6 came in the spirit and power of Moses and Elijah.
Everybody got that, right? That was a good.
That was from my new book.
He was talking about the Nero Redividus, I never get to pronounce that. Yeah, talking about the fact that Nero, the myth was that Nero was going to come back, the head that was wounded. Personally, I believe the head that was wounded is the fact that Rome nearly succumbs to civil war. That's now does the Nero play into that? I think it does in some point. But the fact that the Roman Empire comes back from what we see, near death of the Civil War. We went through the Civil War, I don't think anybody was here during that, 1861 through 65. And we thought it was the end of our country, didn't we, as we read it? There are times when we see those who are alive, remember when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon? You remember that era? They thought it was the end of democracy. There are some who say that today we are threatened with the end of democracy. There are people that believe the ends of things based on this. But the Civil War, yes, Taylor, one more time. You have to speak loud because the people don't know what you're saying.
I also have one more thing regarding the 666 part of the beast. It says the number 666 is almost also 2/3 of 1,000, and Revelation sometimes calculates judgment in thirds. Revelation 8:7 through 12, 9, 15, and 18. Thinkers are as early as the 2nd century suggested that 6 here might function as an evil parody of 7, the key number in Revelation. Indeed, calculated as a number of the name of Jesus comes to 888. Others argued that the invitation to the reader to calculate the number in Revelation 13:18 points to a particular name. Both Greek and Hebrew use letters as also as numerals, so one could add up the letters in a name as numbers, as many Jewish thinkers did. One Jewish prophecy tradition treated names of various rulers as numbers. People in the empire played on the number of Nero Caesar in Greek letters. There are 2 ways to spell Nero Caesar in Hebrew letters. One comes out to 666 and the other to 616. Some manuscripts of Revelation have here 616 instead of 666, as if some knew the riddle's answer but calculated it differently. Translated into Hebrew as a particular way, the Greek term for beast also comes out to 666, and of the beast comes out to 616.
You got all that right? Okay, I'll make a statement right here. I have some ideas who 666 is, and you have some ideas who 666 is, and everybody in the world has an idea who 666 is.
Is that what he was talking about?
Yes. But we don't know. Would the people in the first century have known who they were speaking of? Yes. Remember verse 1 of chapter 1. Of things which must shortly take place, for the time is at hand. Why would you talk about something that's going to happen in 2,000 plus years if the time is at hand? So we keep coming back to this, always coming back to this. But this first beast is the Roman Empire, the same one that Daniel sees in Daniel chapter 7. And they worship the dragon. Now it says they worship the dragon. The dragon is? Satan. Good. Okay. And when we worship anything but God, ultimately, who are we worshiping? Saved by the bell. But we don't have any place to go, so we're going to be here another couple of hours. And they worship the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And I'm going to use some very graphic language here. Why did Pharaoh try to kill all of the babies? Why didn't he just kill adults? Where do you stop a nation? By killing babies. Why did Herod have the babies killed in the first century? Why does Satan want to stop the church in its infancy? You stop it when it's growing. He went off to make war on the rest of the offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. He wanted to kill it when it was a baby. We read that in chapter 12. If you want to stop a movement, you kill it in its infancy. I don't care if you're talking about babies or any movement. What's the term that we use? It's a very technical Greek term. Nip it in the bud.
Yeah, just kind of an observation. Is that why the dragon was trying to eat the child coming out of the woman?
Yes, you want to stop it. Yep. You want to stop it in its infancy. When you don't stop something in its infancy and it grows, we see what happens when it grows.
This may sound, I don't know, but
Speak up so everybody can hear you.
the beast that with the wound, would that wound be open when they're talking about, or was it a scar?
It says it was healed. Whether it's a scar or not, I don't know, and I don't know that it might be pertinent to it, but it was healed. It's anybody ever had a near-death? I'm not going there. You've heard about near-death experiences. When people talk about a near-death experience and they talk about coming back from the dead, you listen to it, don't you? Because we've never experienced anything like that. We listen to it. It's coming back from the dead, unbelievable. And they have seen the Roman Empire come back from civil war back to full force when Vespasian comes back from Egypt as emperor. And it's come back to its full glory. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and dwelling in all that dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. We listen to Taylor, you listen to me, the great persecution of the church and the great tribulation is happening right here. To make war on the saints and to conquer them. Authority was given it over every tribe, people, and language and nation. And what did the Roman Empire rule? In their minds, the whole world. Everyone who's, every language, all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written in the foundation of the world in the book of life, the Lamb was slain. Now he says, if anyone has an ear to hear, and this is where we'll end in just a minute. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. Anyone to be slain with a sword he must be slain. That's the big warning that's coming out. This great tribulation is upon them. And he said, those who are going to be taken captive, they're going to be taken captive. And those who are going to be killed by the sword are going to be killed by the sword. And when you go back to Luke chapter 21, when it talks about the Great Tribulation, it's exactly what Luke records. Is some will go into captivity, and some are going to be slain by the sword. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. But that's a different recollection, but the sword. So the sword's talking about they're going to be killed. So as we read this. But here, remember, if we go back to the fifth seal in Revelation chapter 6. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge the blood on those who dwell on the earth? They were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer, listen to this, until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So this, and the seven seals are really, you've heard of a trailer for a movie? What does a trailer do? Shows you parts of it. This is the outline of what is about to happen. And he says, for this fifth seal, he says, just wait a little bit longer until the number is complete. Questions? Are you in a hurry to go to Applebee's or Cracker Barrel? Yeah. Questions? I put an awful lot of information into this, but if you like to study, but if you're just looking for the answers, sometimes it's hard. You can give the answer and they say, well, what about this and what about that? But if you have the information on where to go look, if you like Roman history as we're going to get into the second beast, read about the guilds and the collegia of the Roman Empire, and it will be very clear to you who this second beast is going to be in the latter part of the chapter. Questions or comments? Chapter 2 or chapter 12? I have chapter 13 and I have chapter 12 somewhere here. I can get you one, don't worry. You didn't realize it was going to be that easy, did you? By the way, I have on our YouTube channel, if you want to see these chapters in their entirety, go to our YouTube channel and it'll be under Reflections on Revelation. You'll see chapter 12 and chapter 13 in all of their historical context. And you love history, don't you? Yes. Okay, go eat.